You know, I think we got more backstory for Uhura in one scene in this episode than we did over 3 seasons and 9 movies with the character. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well because I am here to review yet another episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, this time episode 2, Children of the Comet. I was really hoping once I heard that title that it was actually going to be like a horror themed episode like Children of the Corn, except for it's like little comet people running around the Enterprise or something like that, but sadly, no, that is not what we got. But we did get another excellent one-off episodes, which proves that the pilot was not a fluke, and this is truly a fantastic series so far. And it's not just going to be 1 hour of me just gushing about Pike, I swear to you. Though there will be a little bit of gushing about Pike. He cooks food here. What's not to like about the man? But as per usual, I'm going to stay spoiler-free up front and give you my overview thoughts of the episode, and then we will get into spoilers in the back end. So getting into overall thoughts on this episode, as I kind of joked about at the top of the video, this is very much an Uhura episode, and I really loved how they explored her character. I know it was a joke, but Uhura, as played by Nichelle Nichols, never really got a ton of backstory or a ton of, like, character meat to sink her teeth into. Like, don't get me wrong, Nichelle Nichols, amazing actress, did so much in so many different ways, both in Star Trek and outside of Star Trek, and I'm not knocking her at all, but we all can admit that she didn't really get a lot to do. So one of the biggest promises of this show was getting to actually see a little bit more of Uhura and develop her character, and this episode delivered on that, really showcasing Uhura not only in totality, and we learn more about her backstory and like what drew her to Starfleet and things like that, but also more specifically giving us Uhura at this specific moment in her career. She's not the like calm, collected, you know, Starfleet officer that we see both in the TV show and especially going into the movies where she like knows her stuff and she's very confident in herself. This is Uhura as a cadet, and I really like that the show's exploring this version of the character at this specific moment in time. And Celia Rose Gooding, by the way, who plays Uhura on the show, is absolutely phenomenal in the role. She is honestly a standout in a cast already stacked of standouts, which is really saying something. She brings such warmth and energy, yet you also get this like confidence in her ability, but also this unsureness because she is so young and in Starfleet, and I just loved her performance on every level here. But moving on from Uhura though, the other thing too that I really loved this episode for doing, especially at the top, though kind of throughout the episode too, is again continuing what we saw in the pilot, which was the casualness of the Starfleet crew. I spoke about this in the pilot, and I'll just sort of reiterate here, but as much as I love Discovery, and I do really love Discovery, one of my biggest problems with that show is everything is always like up at 100% all the time. So even when we get moments of just characters just existing casually, it still feels like off-putting from the higher stakes that are going on in that sort of blockbusterized storyline that that show sort of exists within. But here we get scenes where the characters just get to like exist and enjoy being around each other. The first scene of the episode is just like them at a casual dinner, and and it was just so nice to see these characters just exist in a not heightened action adventures type of stakes, but just get to exist as themselves. And it's just something that I wish that Discovery would do a little bit more. Again, I love Discovery, but it's just something that just drawing the comparison really helps me point out why I really love this show for just having that casual feel to it. And the actors, especially Anson Mount, just really fit and live within these characters in those casual spaces. But even when the characters are on the bridge doing like action adventure stuff and like talking back and forth, there's still that camaraderie casualness between the characters that feels a little bit less rigid than any other Star Trek show before it. Like, literally every single Star Trek show had that sort of rigid feel to it, but the casualness that this show exudes on every single level, I just really enjoy. But getting into the general storyline of the episode, as we've been promised, this is another like episodic one-and-done storyline, which in a way, like last episode, which explored the Prime Directive in an explicit way, this episode is actually exploring a similar idea around the Prime Directive, but comments more on how the Prime Directive may have been misinterpreted and misused by writers of previous Trek shows. It's not like the show going out of its way to be like, ha, this is a stupid way to think about the Prime Directive, but there is a sort of like meta critique within the concept of this episode, which is about the characters trying to stop a comet from hitting a pre-warp civilization destroying the planet, which we've seen in other Star Trek shows that did bring up the Prime Directive in this way. And this episode never brings up the Prime Directive necessarily, but there is a sort of like meta commentary in that way. And I really appreciate it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the spoiler-filled section. But again, I just loved everything that this episode was doing. It was touching upon those like very classic Trekkian themes. You have characters negotiating with alien species who have their own culture that we get to see even in short spurts, even with only one version of that alien species there. And we get an away mission where characters are not only getting to explore their own personal issues and things that they're dealing with on sort of a lower like character arc level, but also fits within the larger narrative and storyline of the episode. It's so well written and so well done, and it is absolutely fantastic, and I really adored it. And then the final thing too that I really loved about this episode before we get into spoilers is I like that while this episode was mainly focusing on Uhura, we still get little touchstones of other characters' storylines as well. Spock gets a little bit moved forward here, Pike gets a little bit moved forward here, and other characters like Ortegas gets a little bit as well. And so I really love that while this episode does focus on a singular character for the most part, the other characters are not static. They still are moving forward just slightly, which I really like because that's something that even previous Star Trek shows wouldn't do. Even in like Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, you would get like an episode focused on a character, and the other characters would just kind of be in stasis for the most part. They wouldn't get like a lot to do that moved their character arcs forward in any way, but we would just be focusing on like Bashir or Cisco or Data or something like that, and the other characters would just be around there to facilitate that story. But here, everyone moves forward a tiny little bit who gets featured in the episode. And I just really thought that was just very well done and well written, and it made this episode feel like it had continuity with the previous ones, even while being episodic. Alright, well, as you can tell, there's a lot to talk about this episode, so let's get into spoilers if you have not seen the episode, because I have a lot more to talk about there. Okay, so now that we're in spoilers, again, so much to talk about. So let's get into it. As I alluded to in the spoiler-free section, I loved the opening dinner sequence where just we got to have the captain just having a dinner party, essentially, and I love the implication that this is something that regularly happens, and that there's also like a mild hazing ritual for the younger cadets. I know some people have issues with hazing. I have actually a particular past that makes me very, reticent about hazing, but I like the little hazing rituals of like asking the cadet to wear the dress uniform that make people feel included and like part of the gang. Like it's an experience that everyone goes through, because I really love that while Ortegas is the one that instigates it and like causes the joke and Uhura feels really comfortable, when Pike opens the door, Pike says, cadet uniform, dress uniform, that's funny. And you get the sense that this is like something that regularly happens, and it's just like small little character beats like that where you really get the sense that like there is history to this instead of it just being a one-off thing, and just the casualness of that just gives life to this Enterprise crew that exists outside of what we see in the episode. And I just loved all of that. And that continued into the amazing introduction to Hemmer. Well, we did get to see briefly our chief engineer character last episode. This is where we finally get our introduction to him. And if you're a Star Trek Enterprise nerd, like myself, you're probably freaking out at ANR being a main character in this show. Like, the ANR, if you don't know, were a group of Andorian people that were introduced way back in Star Trek Enterprise Season 4 as sort of an offshoot of the Andorian race, who, as we sort of see in this episode, were blind, but also had their other senses heightened, and also had precognitive abilities. And I like that this episode explains all of that backstory of how this species works through the character, but does so in a way that's not just the character being like, let me explain who I am to you, let me explain how my species works, but is done so in a way that feels conversational and kind of plays up Uhura's uncomfortability. Like, I love her being like, I'm always was told to help people who are, sensory deprivated and things like that. And he's like, no, I'm not sensory deprivated, it's fine. And you also get the sense that there's a little bit of a hazing ritual going on here too, and that Spock is playing into it. Like, I love when Spock throws the carrot and Hammer like catches it. It's like, you forewarn me of your throw by your thoughts, and Spock being like, I intend to do that to demonstrate. And you just get like, this is probably a routine that they've done before, and it again, that lived-in feel, while also giving us explanation of the character and how his species works, while also just like developing the characters as well. Just phenomenal job. Also, speaking on Star Trek Enterprise references, I love that the captain having a dinner is very much a Captain Pike thing to do, but also reminds me of Captain Archer as well, because Captain Archer would have also his little dinners as well throughout Star Trek Enterprise. So I'm just getting all the Enterprise vibes here. I'm just saying, Enterprise did it first, and should be given credit, should be given its due. But then we get another fantastic scene where Pike is like telling a really funny story about Nausicaans with no pants. I love that. That was a great little reference. But also, again, we get like a few scenes in here where like Spock learns like, oh, sometimes you need to laugh at like really bad situations. That gets reiterated a few times throughout the episode and finally culminates in Spock giving a little laugh off screen. I loved that small arc for the character of Spock, like showcasing a little bit more of his human side throughout the episode. I thought that was actually a small, subtle character beat, and that was sort of what I was talking about earlier in the spoiler-free section that just carried through that I really loved. But then we also get Uhura giving us her backstory, and I love her being radically honest here, being like, I don't know if I'm cut out for Starfleet, and giving this really great backstory about her parents being killed and her brother being killed. Again, this is more backstory than we've ever gotten for Uhura ever, and also explains a few things if you know a lot about Uhura in like the actual canon, where like her memory gets erased in one episode of the original series and no one seems to care. They just sort of like, no one checks in on her from her family and things like that. Like, I at least appreciated that, like, there's an explanation, like, oh, she doesn't have a lot of family, so I understand why, like, you know, that sort of thing happened. And again, Celia Rose Gooding delivers it really wonderfully and with aplomb, and I love that this sort of starts off her arc where they're questioning whether she should be in Starfleet, and I love Spock afterwards reassuring her, like, no, you were good. You were, like, being radically honest, and we appreciate that, but also, if you don't want to be in Starfleet, he doesn't say, like, you don't deserve to be in Starfleet or that you shouldn't be in Starfleet, but it's just like, well, if you don't want to be in Starfleet, there are other people who would love your spot, and maybe give them that chance if this is not what you wish to pursue. And I like how that could be misinterpreted by Uhura, as we see later on, but that it is basically Spock just being radically honest. And I just appreciated that well-written version of these characters. But then speaking of character arcs moving forward, we also get another scene with Pike and Una where Pike sort of reiterates his feelings about the fact that we know that he is going to eventually end up in that future with the BB chair, and I like that he's learned that he is going to save these specific people's lives and he's memorized them. That's something that he would have done, and I like that he's sort of thinking about, is his fate written? Is it something that he could avoid? And Una sort of really pushing back against that, but him being like, no, I need to save these people. It's important to, like, know my fate. All this, by the way, is just the first 8 minutes of the episode, so just phenomenally done. But we finally get into the main story arc of this, which is this comet that is going to land and destroy this planet, killing all life on the planet, so they wish to divert it, but there is, for some reason, a force field on it. Which, by the way, the moment the force field went up around the comet, I was like, oh damn, interesting. I'm very curious to see how this is gonna go. And with that said, I want to kind of explain what I meant back in my spoiler-free section about how this is sort of a meta-commentary on the way the Prime Directive is used. Because one of my biggest issues with the way the Prime Directive has sometimes been used throughout Star Trek is how it's not just used to, like, we shouldn't interfere in other cultures, which I think is actually a really good idea, and I like that usage of the Prime Directive, but sometimes it's extrapolated out to there being, like, a natural course of events, and so when, like, a whole civilization may die or perish, Starfleet does nothing because they're like, well, they were meant to die because that's what the universe wants, apparently. It's sort of like this attribution to, like, the ways of the universe that means people should die, which is a weird way to interpret the Prime Directive, and I always had issues with it. And it's come up a few times throughout Star Trek, like Star Trek Enterprise did it in the episode Dear Doctor, in Star Trek Into Darkness did it in the opening sequence of that movie, Star Trek The Next Generation did it in Season 7, I forget the name of the episode, but it was the episode where we meet Worf's brother, who was like, oh, these people are going to die, and Starfleet's like, no, we can't save them, and so Worf's brother, like, beams them to the holodeck on the Enterprise, and Picard gets all upset for some reason, like, oh, you didn't let the people be genocided? How dare you?
What I propose is we create an atmospheric shield on the planet. We can camouflage the equipment just as was done with my observation post. No one will ever know it's there.
You can't be serious.
Indeed, I am. I realize it will only provide atmosphere for a limited area on the surface, but it will be enough to save one village.
I have no intention of compounding what you have done by committing another gross violation of the Prime Directive.
Captain, the Boralans have a rich and beautiful culture, a deep spiritual life. They deserve the chance to survive.
And so while this episode isn't directly calling out the Prime Directive, it is sort of deconstructing, like, nah, that's stupid. Like, Pike at one point, I think, even says, like, we don't let people just die and stuff. We won't interfere with their cultures, but we won't let them just die. And I like that sort of, like, rejiggering of the way the Prime Directive has sometimes been interpreted pretty badly, in my opinion, through some of the Trek writers of past. I don't think, again, the show's not directly calling it out, but it is a subtle commentary on that, in my opinion. But then from here we get basically two concurrent storylines going on. The first one is we have our away team going down to the Comet. And I loved as they were going down, Nurse Chapel like gives everyone this sort of medicine to sort of help them like stay alive on the planet. And again, I just really love how weird they've made Nurse Chapel in the show. She's just like a slightly off-putting dork, and I love her to death. She might end up being one of my favorite characters on the show, which I would never have thought for Nurse Chapel. I just love the way they've interpreted her character, and the way she starts flirting with Spock was also really good as well, which, by the way, I love also as well on a big Trekkie fan level, because it starts to show why Nurse Chapel started to have feelings for Spock, as we saw in the original series. In the original series, it's just sort of like she has feelings for him because someone needs to lust after Spock because it was the 1960s, so why not? And here we're actually getting a little bit of a reasoning why she likes to play around and flirt with Spock, which will also probably feed into Spock's arc because, as we knew in the pilot, he is currently engaged to T'Pring. And so I like that sort of conflicting character arcs while also fitting into the canon of it all. So just a lot of fun with just small little sequences throughout the episode. But then we go down to the planet and we get Sam Kirk, Kirk's brother again, who I love. I did not expect this to be a character that I would really, really enjoy. We also get comment about his mustache, which I also liked. But I liked him sort of being reassuring to Uhura and saying like, hey, you got this, you can do this. I get it, it's your first away mission, but you can do this. I believe in you. And then he ends up being a total complete idiot by touching the alien's egg, which, by the way, no one was like, has anyone seen Aliens? This is a bad idea. This giant eggs on a planet thing, not good. But he touches it and gets hurt because Sam Kirk's a dummy and sort of sets off this whole problem on the planet, which leads to a wonderful scene between Uhura and Spock, where Uhura reassures her and gives her a really good pep talk after a really bad pep talk, and kind of hinting at those same ideas that we saw already throughout the episode, like sometimes you have to laugh at this situation. You can do this. You are literally the only one who can do that. Hypotheticals don't matter. You can do this. I just really thought that that was a really wonderful scene, and then I like that they were able to figure out that this egg reacted to music through Uhura's humming, which is something that Uhura, again, in canon, does. She is a singer. We saw that way back in the original series.
Whose devil ears and devil eyes could rip your heart from you. At first his look could hypnotize, and then his touch would vaporize.
And so again, I love these building off of pre-established traits to figure out the storyline in the episode. And I also like that we get pointed out that like music is a version of math, which is why you can sort of interpret music through different languages and cultures. And so I like that, like calling that idea out. But then they are able to beam off the planet, and Nurse Chapel is like right there in the transporter room to grab Sam Kirk as soon as he comes in and they get out. But this brings us to the other part of the episode where we sort of meet these religious zealot people who are here to defend this comet, and again, kind of bring up that prime directive kind of concept that we're deconstructing here of like, this is the preordained path. This was meant to happen. We should let these people die. It brings life, that sort of thing. And Pike being like, again, that idea of like, we don't let this just happen to people. All really wonderful ideas. I also really love that we get small moments with Ortegas, that Ortegas like wants to be the best pilot and Pike plays off of that. Like, if you're gonna be the best pilot, like this is now the moment to prove it. And they go into the Comet and like do this gamble where Pike says, well, you have to help us now. We buy us some time because you have to help us or else we'll accidentally destroy the Comet. I thought that was really smart. But the other thing too I liked with this, with Ortegas' flying, is that it wasn't that Ortegas was missing every single shot, but that she was able to like miss the like most important kill shot. I liked, most of the time when you see these sort of action sequences done, it's like, oh, we're gonna prove that this character's the best. They miss every single shot and so amazing. It's like, no, they're a targeting computer. She's not gonna be able to have them miss every single shot. And so I liked that she was able to avoid the like big important ones, but she wasn't avoiding every single shot in the Enterprise. It's a small little subtle thing that I really liked them displaying within the visual effects department of the episode. But then they perform a I'm not touching you thing with Spock's shuttle where he does break apart some of the Comet in order to get it off of course without actually touching it. So the Comet itself doesn't. And so they divert the course of the Comet. I thought that was very clever and a clever way to do it without the religious zealots finding out about the Comet. But then it also brings life to the planet as well because it like breaks off and like adds more, changes the atmosphere of the planet to give more water or something like that. And we get to see the aliens on the planet like looking up at water and amazing, like, oh god, there's life bringing here stuff. What is weird though, I will say, is that these aliens that live on this planet didn't like evolve to exist in a desert world. Like, there's a part of me that's saying like, oh, this changing of the entire ecosystem of this planet might be devastating to some of the native species there. Like, I'm like kind of curious about like if there's some species that now died off because of this. So just something to think about a little bit there, but I like in concept the idea, and I like that at the end of the episode we basically learned that this comet had been able to predict this in some way, and I like that this doesn't get answered. There are a lot of like unknowable mysteries, especially in the original series, like, and Next Generation as well. When we get into Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, most of those shows like did answer every single alien thing that we came across, but in the original series and Next Generation there were many mysteries like the Dyson Sphere or the Doomsday Machine or things like that never got 100% answered, and I like that this episode just leaves it open like, we don't know. And maybe it'll come back up in future seasons, maybe this is like the hint at the larger arc of the season, but this sort of like alien mystery and this preordained idea where they like could see ahead and like see these planets is an interesting concept for this show to just leave dangling, but it does tie into Pike's storyline as well, which I really love because Pike sort of has this thematic idea of like, maybe my death is preordained and can I change it? And so I like that it sort of dovetails with that idea. Again, even while this episode is focused mainly on Uhura, we get these little character beats throughout the episode, and I really just thought it was so well done. But then it brings us to Uhura, where she gets a little bit more, where she's like, yes, I do belong in Starfleet, I feel confident here, and I just like that sort of bringing forth of her entire arc throughout this episode. But that sort of leads me to the end of the episode. This was another phenomenal episode of the show. I'm loving the casualness of it, the character development of it, but also the episodic nature. It's just hitting all the beats that I love a Star Trek show for, and it's honestly, this is a phenomenal show so far. I am just absolutely adoring it. But with all that being said, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments as well. Did you like this episode? Did you hate this episode? I'd love to hear all of that. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more of my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, but I'm also doing Moon Knight, Halo, a few other shows, movies, things like that. That's all on this channel. I also have a main channel called Jessie Gender, where I do my sort of bigger video essay type of stuff, so you can find the link to that channel down below as well. I have a video, I believe, on James Gunn coming up in just a little bit over there, which I'm very excited about. It should be a really fun video that I'm very, very proud of, so please check that out if you have not. If you want to support me doing what I do, I also have a Patreon page, and I am also available on Nebula, and I'm on Twitter. And I also have a podcast called Jumpgate, where I'm rewatching Babylon 5 with one of my very best friends, Vera Wild of the Accounts of Geeks channel. But beyond all of that, thank you so much, friends. You are lovely and adorable, and I adore you, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.